everybody. I think we're going to get started. Welcome to the 92nd Street Y. My name is Christine Chen, and I have the great pleasure of being the Director of Adult Programming here. Thank you so much for joining us tonight to celebrate the life of Madeline Kahn with some of the people who knew her best. We're so pleased to welcome back our moderator, Valerie Smaldone. Valerie is an accomplished interviewer, radio and TV host, and producer. She can be heard at events as a live announcer, known as the Voice of God, on 1010 Wins as a voice, or narrating a crime series on Investigation Discovery. She teaches experts on how to be interviewed and create content for media. Here's a fun fact. Valerie appeared on an episode of Blue Bloods on CBS this season. So please help me welcome back to our stage, Valerie Smaldone.
Well, thank you, Christine, for a nice introduction. Good evening, everybody. It's so great to see all of you tonight. We started this program back in January. We were going to do this in January, but then that one blizzard came to us, and we canceled it for better weather. Not so sure at what time in April, but it is my distinct pleasure to be here. I met William V. Madison, first when I did an interview for my radio show America Weekend, which is, you can't hear it in New York, but you can hear it online. And I interviewed Bill and I said, what an interesting topic. This book is chock full of information on the woman that we all love and admire so much. Let's do it at the Y. So this is how this all began. You will find information about Madeline you never knew before. The book is so dense with information and stories and facts. For example, she was in an after-school special with a kid who was her teen son in the film. And that kid was Ben Affleck. Okay, so did you know that? Oh, okay. You looked like you knew it for a second. She also did commercials for Diet Coke and the Beef Council. Crazy things that you may never have heard of or knew of before. You'll find out about it in the next hour or so. All proceeds from the book sale will go to the Ovarian Cancer Research Fund Association Alliance. It is just merged with the other organization in Washington. Very important organization. And on May 16th, there's going to be Stand Up for Madeline at Caroline's, which is a fundraiser of comedy and celebration of the life of Madeline Kahn. So I do encourage you to go and see that. William V. Madison is a former producer at CBS News, which is where his impeccable research skills come into play. He was also associate editor of Opera News, and he has a Broadway credit being the production assistant on the Broadway musical Rags back in 1986. A deep admirer of Madeline Kahn as well, forced him to do this event. So I welcome you all. I encourage you to pick up the book. There will be a book signing following our discussion. Let me introduce you to our wonderful panel of guests. Tony Award-winning Joanna Gleason, you know her from Into the Woods, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, Social Security, The West Wing, Friends, The Good Wife. Ms. Gleason teaches in high schools and colleges across the U.S., and you look for her forthcoming novel, right? Yeah, forthcoming. Rancho Mirage. Joanna Gleason. Our next guest is an accomplished actor, playwright, director, and teacher who debuted on Broadway in Fiddler on the Roof, was in the Diary of Anne Frank, with film roles spanning Catch-22 to My Cousin Vinny to the Muppet Movie. He's been in the West Wing. He's an ensemble member of the amazing Steppenwolf Theater Company. Please welcome Austin Pendleton. We have a New York City-born actress beginning her career as a young performer in an ABC after-school special and the film 7 Minutes in Heaven. She's appeared in Some Kind of Wonderful and The Adventures of Ford Fairlane, as well as Made in Manhattan. Maddie has been in numerous TV shows and appeared with Madeline Kahn playing her niece in Mr. President. Welcome, Madeline Corman. And our final panelist is a wonderful, accomplished actor and author in the original cast of Company, receiving acclaim in the film Breaking Away, playing Goldie Hawn's mother in Private Benjamin, and nominated for the Independent Spirit Award for her role as Sue Berlin, the mother of the character played by Edie Falco in Judy Berlin, where she worked with Madeline Kahn. Lots of connections tonight, you'll find out. She's been on Pushing Daisies, and Nurse Jackie has written several books. Please welcome Barbara Barrie. And now the man who wrote the book, William V. Madison. The gang's all here. Okay, thank you all for coming. Great to see you. First of all, Bill, what does the V stand for?
Eunice. My parents couldn't spell.
Okay. All right, if you're going to go there. You know, Bill, when we started the conversation on the radio, I asked you, this is your first book. You come from a news background. What compelled you to write this book about Madeline Kahn?
Well, for one thing, she worked with some of the most interesting people of her time, as we see before us. For another thing, I have some background in music, and music was obviously very important to Madeline. The more research I did, the more I realized how important it was. So the combination of this is an interesting subject and this is a subject to which I can bring a certain background and knowledge made me think, also, nobody had done it. So,
Shockingly.
Yeah.
Could you grab that microphone? There, because my hand was hurting for a moment. Okay, thank you. So, you know, when you speak about Madeline Kahn to anybody, everybody has a story. It seems like everybody says, oh, I remember her from this film role or this particular iconic line in a movie. We know her from the big movies, but what happened to the other films that we didn't know about, or the smaller roles? Tell us about some of those lesser-known roles that she played.
Some of them are absolutely terrible. I think we need to be honest about that. Two of her movies are on my list of the worst movies ever made. One Tom Tom, The Dog Who Saved Hollywood, and Slapstick of Another Kind. I watched them so that you don't have to. However, in virtually every movie she ever made, Madeline is spectacularly good. You take something like From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil Frankweiler, which was one of her very earliest movies. She's in the movie for 2 minutes. The movie got terrible reviews. The little kids, not the best actors. Ingrid Bergman wearing a really bad wig. Madeline's 2 minutes are sheer perfection, and you can actually see them on YouTube. She's playing a school teacher, and she nearly was a school teacher, so it's very close to her. She was shooting blocks from her house, and she nails it. And this was the very beginning of her screen career. So that the older she gets, the more experience she gets. If you get to a movie like Nixon, she has very little screen time in that, but it is so precise. Everything she does counts. I'm not even sure I'm answering your question, but the point is, yes, some of her movies were not good, and some of them do deserve to be returned to. One of those is very much Judy Berlin, and the other one that I think people need to be sure not to miss is The Adventure of Sherlock Holmes' Smarter Brother, that Gene Wilder wrote and directed for her.
So we're going to get to Judy Berlin with Barbara on the panel, but first, the title of the book is Being the Music, which is an odd term. Where does that come from?
It comes from Madeline. She said a couple of times that her ambition was to be the music. And it's such a Madeline thing to say, it's such a Madeline way to say it. The context originally was Alan Arkin said, there are so many things you can do, how did you decide, what was it you originally wanted to do? And she said, I wanted to be the music. She had to think about it. She didn't want to perform for other people, she didn't want to do anything but be the music. And I wanted to use the infinitive, and people like Madeline's friend Betty Aberlin said, no, make it being, and the editor said, make it being, and that's why it's being the music and not to be the music.
Well, let's talk about her musical career and her love of singing and her musical voice, the way she used her voice in a musical fashion. And the fun fact for her is that she sang up at the Bavarian Manor upstate New York. She was a singing waitress one summer. So she loved performing music.
Well, most of the time, yes. Yeah, her mother forced her to perform starting when she was a very small girl, and that she did not like. She called it an utterly terrible idea, quote unquote. And she often felt, her mother was her first voice teacher, and she felt that she was singing to make her mother happy and not to liberate her own sound. That said, yes, she absolutely loved music. She loved to hear other people perform. She went to the opera all the time. She had classical training. She actually sang opera. In 1970, she performed in La Boheme with the Washington Opera. In 1981, she nearly sang the same part again in Santa Fe, long after she was a movie star. She was going to fill in on short notice for a performer who was ill. Yet again, I'm not even sure I'm answering your question.
Well, did a lot of you know she was a singer, a very accomplished singer, and that she loved opera and she had all these roles, and then she had some disastrous occurrences with Broadway, didn't she? That a very demanding role that she had a difficult time with.
Yeah, the role is Lily Garland in On the 20th Century, and the role calls for lyric coloratura with lots of ornamentation. It calls for chest voice, it calls for character voice, and it's a long sing. And Madeline had performed demanding roles before, Cunegonde and Candide, but that would be a one night only. In 2x2, she has a very demanding aria, one aria. On the 20th Century, she was expected to give 8 performances a week of this very difficult score, and she thought she was going to do this permanently. So she began having conflicts with a lot of people and wound up getting fired from the show.
On to happier things.
There are many.
Right. There are very many accomplishments. And what you'll find in this book is, again, so much dense information about a very varied career. She passed away, sadly, at the young age of 57 years old, and yet did so much in her life. I'm going to get to the panel in a second. Before we do that, Bill, she had this incredible comedic flair about her, and yet it also for her was something that was a bit of a dichotomy, wasn't it? She wanted to be taken seriously.
Very much so. There were a number of things going on. She certainly knew that she was funny, but sometimes she would get so wrapped up in her characters that she was surprised when people started to laugh. And because of certain self-image issues she had, she sometimes worried that people were laughing at her instead of at the character or at the joke. She was tremendously funny. The music is part of her comedy, and I think you were leading me in that direction. Mel Brooks says it's absolutely because of Madeline's musical training that she had that timing. It's always musical. She sings every script she reads. And Bill Cosby compared working with her to improvising jazz, so that every dimension of her acting was musical. And the comedic sense, she was basically a method actress, which is very unusual in the kinds of comedy that she did. But that also gives you this wonderful undercurrent of vulnerability, of a real woman, even when the character is extremely broad. My favorite example is in Blazing Saddles, and it's after she and Sheriff Bart have had sex and he's just left. And she closes the door behind him. She leans up against the door and she says, "What a nice guy." And the way she says it, instantly you know, none of the other guys were nice.
So much fun. You said she was the farthest from Lily Van Stoep in real life, and yet, by the way, that was named one of the top film roles of all time by Premiere Magazine, right? The farthest that you can imagine. So let me go to our panel. Barbara, you're sitting right next to Bill, and we talk about the film that you were nominated for this Independent Spirit Award, Judy Berlin. What was that experience like working with Madeline?
Well, actually, we didn't have any scenes together. We were on location in Westchester, I forgot the name of the town, very close. We had no scenes together, but we did, you know, we were in the makeup room and we we shared rooms in the director's mother's house because there were no dressing rooms. No, it was a low budget film, so we were. Is this on? Is it on? No. And she was an immensely modest girl. I mean, the car would pick me up on the west side for the shoot, and then we'd go to Park Avenue and pick her up, and she would always get in the car with such modesty. I don't know how to describe it. She had no airs about her, and I was amazed by that. And by the way, she was already sick then, and we all knew it. And it was her last picture, and she was sick, but she, did all the scenes, never complained, was darling to everybody, and I had met her other times, but socially. So I really can't say what it's like to work with her, except to be with her was lovely. She was just a lovely girl.
Well, your son worked with her and had scenes with her in that same movie.
My son Aaron played the lead, and with her, and I don't know what he thought. I still don't know what he thinks about almost anything.
He's a little more forthcoming with me, but just one.
Oh, it was, well, the secrets are vast. I have no idea. But anyway, it was a hard experience for him because he was not primarily at that point an actor. And by the way, Eric Mendelsohn, who directed that film, he's not here tonight.
He's not here.
It's a shame because he is such a great director. And Madeline flourished under him. Well, we all flourished under him. So I think I said enough.
No, you're doing great. This is a great story. So yeah, you didn't have scenes with her, but you got the essence of her. Did you get that sense that Bill explained, her sense of great insecurity and perhaps not feeling up to par all the time as an individual? Did you feel that?
No, but Bill knows more than I do. I mean, I wasn't with her that much. She wasn't a social friend. She was only a professional friend. I had no sense. Now, when you said she wanted to be taken seriously, if you do comedy, you are taken seriously. It's hard. It's hard to do comedy. And people who do it well, they are really taken seriously. And she never evinced any kind of insecurity, except all actors do. You would say things in the makeup room like, oh my God, I've got this terrible scene coming up and I don't know if I can do it. And there was one funny story about that I'll tell you just briefly. I had a scene with Edie Falco, who was playing my daughter. But we were in the movie of an estranged mother and daughter who did not like each other. So I got to the set, and Madeline was in the car, and I said to the stage manager, I said, where is Edie? And he said, she doesn't want to meet you. I said, oh, really? Really? No, she just wants to meet you in the scene, because that will make the scene really better. She doesn't like you, she's, I said, okay. And Madeline said, what? So we met on the steps of this high school. I never met her before. Of course, I knew who she was, and it was a great scene. She was wonderful, and Madeline, was just as amazed as I was. But it was a very nice company. There was nobody was a diva. It was a low budget. You can't afford to be a diva on a low budget movie. You're lucky if you get lunch. That was my main feeling about her. She was just kind of a whole person. You know more, right?
He certainly does. Thank you for that. Maddie, you were a young teen in Mr. President.
Well, I was an old teen, but yes.
Okay. And it was, you bonded in a very special way, didn't you?
Well, yeah. I mean, it was such a crazy time and a crazy show. The show was called Mr. President, and it was the very first one of the first season of Fox having television shows, series. And the first season, Mr. President, starring George C. Scott as the President of the United States, was a single camera show, which was really ahead of its time. And I was very excited, and it was one of the writers of MASH and Taxi, and it was all, and I was this little girl from Westchester, near where you were shooting, coming out to LA to do this job, and in real life my mother had just passed away, so it was a kind of a crazy time, and I get out there and there's this lovely woman playing my mother, and as is wont to happen on television shows, when they're not going well, they fire the woman. So they fired Carlin Glynn, who's an amazing actress and was wonderful.
Also in Judy Berlin.
Who's also in Judy Berlin, and Mary Stuart Masterson's real life mom, and a great human being. And they fired her, and they retooled the show, and they're going to do a 4-camera sitcom, like traditional sitcom. And George C. Scott is miserable. He hated every minute of everything, but now they're going to bring on Madeline Kahn. And so what could be better? And I only share all that because I had lost my real mom, I had lost my television mom, and here comes someone I admire so much. I had grown up with my family, always really loved comedy, and she was just a huge part of my childhood in some ways, seeing Blazing Saddles, seeing the Mel Brooks movies. And so I was excited, but I was also cautiously optimistic, because I was also excited to work with George C. Scott, and rest his soul, he was not a lot of fun. Not so much fun. And not happy to be there. You know, I thought, oh, here's this icon, this person I can't wait to meet, and he's doing this TV show, so he must love the TV show, and it's going to be awesome. And he hated the TV show and hated being there. But Madeline came on, and she just had her own energy. She wasn't affected by his, well, maybe she was, but I didn't see it. She just came with her from her own planet, in her own world, and he was so tickled by her that things lightened up almost immediately. And I bonded with her because we were both from New York, so we'd fly back and forth. We went through our first earthquake together. Yeah, Bill likes this story.
Wasn't there a phone call that you initiated to the producers?
Yeah, I called to say, do we still have to go to work? Because, I mean, the earth, sure, you know, and they were like, come on in. So I'm driving in my little red car, scared, and we get there, and at Paramount, and Madeline is also, you know, shaking, but everybody else is going around, and we were rehearsing that day, and everyone's going about their business, and Madeline just stops, and she was so pale, she was so freaked. It was a big earthquake, but I guess not that big if you live in Los Angeles. And so she just stops and she goes, people! And everyone's like, people! There has been an earthquake. The earth has moved. And everyone stopped, and I stopped, and she just goes, I am going to scream. Then she screamed really beautifully, like with her singing scream, and everyone just stopped, and she went, all right, now we can go back to work. You know, what's better than that? So that was Madeline. She would, I'd go, yeah, but and she was lovely. She was definitely on her own plane. You know, I was probably looking for her to be more maternal, and that was not her nature necessarily. She didn't have kids. She did not have a great relationship, according to her, with her own mother. But I was a very young, how old was I? 17, 18? And I was young in a lot of ways. But she treated me like a peer in a great way, and I also learned a lot. I learned to do a good Madeline Kahn impression.
Very good.
Just really good.
We may call upon you again to do that. So good.
And she made everything. It was just from an acting point of view. It was, scripts were not always the greatest, but she really did. She took it very seriously. She was always hilarious. She didn't love the form of getting new lines thrown at her last minute. She really was, in my view, a woman of the theater, you know, someone who cared about preparation and cared about performing and didn't like to go out without a net, didn't like to go out on sitcoms. Sometimes what they'll do is you'll do it live, and if something isn't working, the writers furiously will write a new joke and hand it to you. And she wasn't always crazy about that, but whatever the line, I remember there was one line, and it just said in the script, "Oh my God," you know, and at the table read, she would just get to that line. Oh my God. And it was just like, she could really make anything a meal without it being it just made all the sense. Of course that's how you would say it, but I would never have thought to say it like that. So
Wow, great experience, thank you.
it was a good thing to work with her.
Sure. Austin, hey. So I know that you worked with her and you felt very enriched, according to what I read in the book, enriched by the experience as an actor, as a director, working with her. Can you share
Well,
some
I
of
never
that?
worked with her as a director.
No, but as an actor, right?
Yeah,
So can
yeah.
you share some of that experience?
Well, I did. We were in 4 movies together, and 3 of them we were in scenes together. The one where we were not in scenes together was the Muppet Movie, but the other 3, the first one was What's Up, Doc? The second was Simon, a movie called Simon, the first film written and directed by Marshall Brickman. And the third one was the Buck Henry movie called First Family. So in those 3 movies, What's Up, Doc? And Simon and First Family, we were in a lot of scenes together. And I first met her the first day of rehearsal for What's Up, Doc? Which was on a Sunday on the Warner Brothers lot, beginning at 9 in the morning in August, which is, you know, appalling. And I stayed. They put me up at a motel around the corner from the Warner Brothers lot. So I went to a coffee shop at 8 in the morning, and there was Madeline, who I'd never met. And we introduced ourselves to each other, and she was very shy. Therefore, I became shy, and we were shy together all through breakfast. I don't think I'd ever seen her in anything. I mean, I certainly knew who she was, but I don't think I'd ever seen her. And I found out the reason we were beginning on a Sunday was she had a week to go in 2 by 2 on Broadway, so they wanted to get a whole day of rehearsal for her on her day off on Sunday. And then she would go and we would rehearse without her for the rest of the week, and then we'd begin to shoot. But we were shy. And she was very quiet. I asked her about 2 by 2, and she answered intelligently and modestly. And she was funny in a sort of shy way. And we walked over gravely to the Warner Brothers lot. And we began our read-through, and whereupon she exploded with brilliance. It was incredible. But it wasn't like she turned into a different person. It was the same person suddenly becoming like a Roman candle. And everybody liked her. And the movie is with Barbara Streisand and Ryan O'Neal. And as the shoot went on, you know, well, Barbara would give her tips on film acting, which she would use. I mean, not every day or anything like that, but she was kind of knocked out by Madeline. And there would be some scene, and she would come over to me, Madeline would come over to me and say, "Barbara told me," I said, "that last take was really good." She said, well, Barbara came over to me before the last take and whispered something to simplify. Things like that. That's the way people felt about her. She was clearly, possibly going to walk away with the film. But nobody felt competitive with her. And it was, everybody wanted her to be the best she possibly could, and she was. But again, all through the shoot of the film, she would be very shy, and then we would shoot a scene, and she would be like that character. It was kind of thrilling. And then the same thing happened in Simon. She was considerably more relaxed by then. By the time we did Simon, which was 8 years later, or something. No, 6 or 7 years later. Yeah, I know. And then the year after that was First Family, which of course she plays the First Lady, which must be the greatest performance of a First Lady ever on film. don't know. She would come over and whisper things to me, particularly during What's Up, but in all of the shoots. She would make something would open some film would open that would represent to me an unalloyed professional catastrophe. and everyone, and she would come over and whisper, "You're taking this very well." and then she would walk away discreetly. And then I would, and then I would run into her a lot in New York. She was, of course, in New York. And once I ran into her when she was trying to get out, she was trying to and succeeded in getting out of jury duty down there at the jury duty place. And I would run into her on the street and everything. And there was always, and I went backstage and saw her at that play for which she won the Tony, the Sisters Rosenzweig, in which she was wonderful, of course. And she was, there was always, from the first moment I met her, there was a quality of sadness. Not melancholy, not depression, although maybe it was, but just sadness, which of course a lot of the great, this is a cliche to say, a lot of great actors who are comic actors have. But it was kind of, I don't know what the word, it was kind of radiant in her. It never got in the way of a conversation, but I always felt she seemed kind of sad. And yet she was very pleasant, and although she was always kind of shy, happy to be with whoever she was talking to. These are my impressions of her. She was a wonderful actress. I mean, just as you said, she really inhabited a scene. And when you played a scene with her, as I did on several occasions in those 3 different movies, if you couldn't act opposite her, you would, as my friend Roscoe Lee Brown used to put it, you should seek vocational guidance. I mean, it was just, you couldn't act with that. Forget it, And, okay.
Yeah, that's all good. And I know that you were charmed from the beginning when you met her. You just,
totally.
It was an instant connection.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
This modest and brilliant woman.
Captivated you.
Sweet-natured.
Yeah. So on to Joanne. Joanna, you describe Madeline in the book, The Detached Retina on the Eye of American Comedy. Which is quite wonderful.
It goes to what we're saying about the fact that she had a quality about her as if she were not from around here. There was some other rhythm in her, another clock at work, and I always thought of her as Mercury, which is brilliant, but it needs to be defined by what contains it. So if she had a great piece of material, then there she was. She filled it up, and she embodied it, and it was perfect. And when the material wasn't great, it was a struggle for her. In your book, William V., there are lots of descriptions of the jobs that came to an end, and a lot of the clashes of personality, and how she got let go from things. I met her in 1978. I was doing a show called I Love My Wife, and Lenny Baker, the great late Lenny Baker, was in it. He was a friend of Madeline's, and we ran into her. It was on the 20th Century was just opening, and he said, "How are you doing with the 8 shows a week?" And she said, "Maddie, you should do that. I'll just tell you the line. You should say it better." She said, I'm a meatball. Just roll sauce on me and roll me out there." She said, "I hate the producers and they hate me." And she was on her way to leaving that show. But Madeline was also on the cusp of when musicals changed, and the voices and the vocal demands and the amplified orchestras and the kinds of voices that were the new hybrid. And there are a lot of these girls and women today who can do this. They can sing with these huge opera voices and then also belt, and the most fatiguing thing, of course, is to talk in a show. That's even more. Madeline was not that. She was a creature, singular, and had this beautiful voice, but she just didn't want to do it. Maybe this comes from her mother saying, "This is what you're going to do." And she wanted to do it 8 times a week, and she was miserable. and we knew it, and so we could just see that she was untethering herself from that show, and then of course they just said, that's enough.
So for richer, for poorer.
Yes, a movie I had forgotten all about until you reminded me. It was a movie for television, HBO, I think, and Madeline played a bag lady. I didn't work with Madeline on that, but Jack Lemmon starred in it, and I gathered from the director, who's a friend of mine to this day, that she did not have a great time doing it. You ask Madeline to play a bag lady, and then what you're buying is Madeline Kahn's take, the Madeline Kahn thing, and that to somebody like Madeline and to a lot of people becomes offensive in a way. It's like saying you want one thing from me, you don't want any surprises, and I think when that comes clear after a couple of days of shooting or one day, then things get very bumpy, and the actor is the one who's not going to be happy.
It's always a challenge for a performer, isn't it, to
being
walk that
typecast.
line, yeah.
Well, if you get great at one thing, then that's the one thing they want. And then you say, well, wait, I'm crying on the inside. I'm not interested, I'm not interested.
Can I say something? You know, everything you say makes me think of, my husband used to say about certain people who are so talented that they are special. He always used to say, that person is on his or her own FM tuning.
Yes, right.
And she was always on her own FM tuning. Right. I know some other people like that too, who are stunningly brilliant. But isn't that how she was? She was
well, it looked like the floorboards under her were the most secure when she was working at something she loved.
Uh-huh.
There she was, and she knew the territory, and she had freedom to move within that territory. And I don't really know much about her private life. She was very private, actually. But we ran into each other so many times over so many decades, and we ran in '88 when she was doing Born Yesterday, that we finally agreed, standing on Lexington Avenue, somewhere not far from here, that we had seen each other enough times on the street to constitute having had lunch together. She said, so we don't have to do this.
Well, it's an interesting quality, the sort of floating above things, which has an impact on what some of you have said, was sometimes for her a defense mechanism, as it was in 2 by 2. Joan Copeland actually thought it was intentional, but she never seemed to notice that Danny Kaye was not being nice. And the rest of the cast were having open warfare with Danny Kaye, and Madeline just pretended everything was okay. And Boom Boom Room, Joe Papp fired the director, Julie Bavasso, in a hugely public scene in front of the whole company. And then Julie came back a few days later and had another huge public scene in front of the whole cast. And when Madeline was asked about it, she said, oh, I don't know, it just sort of happened, and then Joe took over.
Well, she was canny that way. I mean, she knew that this was not a fight she could win.
Right, no, absolutely.
To get to do the things she loved to do. She did a show called Marco Polo Sings a Solo, a John Guare play, back, I don't know when.
1977.
Thank you very much. And my husband, Chris Sarandon, was in it with her. And he tells the story of the fact that, and it's in your book, they had no first act, they had no second act, and they had changes every day to the first act, which is not uncommon for us to be in new plays, and we get handed new pages. They had so many changes that they had to change the color of the paper every day. So today we're doing amaryllis, and tomorrow will be puce and yellow. And they decided to run Act 1, and they ran Act 1, and then there was a conference, and the producer and director said to the cast, we're going to cut 20 pages. And Madeline burst into tears. And everybody stopped and looked at her, and she said, I know this is about my ego, but that's why I'm doing this. And my husband never forgot, he said it's the most honest thing that any actor has ever said. You cut my lines, I'm here for this. This is what I want to do. This is where she lives.
That's fantastic. Well, another instance of Madeline's rising above and pretending nothing was going wrong was actually What's Up Doc, and I was fascinated that both Austin and Ryan O'Neal said they had no idea she was terribly unhappy during the shooting of that movie. Peter Bogdanovich had some idea because she had confided in him, but she was terrified that he really thought that she really was Eunice Burns. She didn't actually audition for the part, it was more like a job interview. So she thought, oh, well, he hired Madeline Kahn. He didn't cast me as Eunice Burns. He hired Madeline Kahn. That must be how he sees me. And she had a terrible time with that. But Austin, you told me, and Ryan agreed, that neither one of you had any idea. She was calling her brother every night in tears, sobbing, "Is this really the way people see me?"
You wouldn't have known.
And I found that
wouldn't have
fascinating.
known.
Yeah, she wound up in therapy almost immediately. She was just so unhappy. I'm going to give this back to you.
Let's talk about some of these darker issues, because you do talk in the book, Bill, about her early years. And you mentioned, Austin, the sadness that seemed to be an undercurrent. What is the cause of this in your estimation, from her background? Not that you're a therapist, I understand, but your research is strong, and you found out a lot of things about her past.
Well, John Hansberry wants me to say the answer to everything is her mother. John is here. John married Madeline. They were together for about 10 years and they married at the end of Madeline's life, a wonderful man. Certainly she did not have great parenting going on. Her father walked out when she was about 3. She had chickenpox at the time. She chased him to the door sobbing, "Are you leaving because I'm ugly?" So I think every actress, it's a requirement, every actress is concerned about her appearance. With Madeline, it went somewhat deeper than just, I need to look good for my job. And again, that had an impact on Eunice Burns. Are people going to leave me because I'm ugly? When her stepfather walked out, she was at her heaviest. So she was old enough by then, she was 16, she knew that the divorce wasn't her fault. But yet again, a man walked out when she wasn't pretty. So she had a lot of this kind of anxiety going on. You were saying, it's remarkable how much Madeline accomplished. Well, she had to. It was absolutely necessary that she work as much as possible because she was supporting her mother, who was mentally unstable, financially extravagant, and incredibly manipulative. I mean, the story I told when I interviewed her, she would answer virtually nothing. "Oh, it was all too long ago. Oh, I don't remember." And finally, I had to leave, and I said, "Is there anything you want to say to me before I go?" And she said, "I like you. You're handsome." And I thought, yeah, she's trying to butter me up. So I'll tell a good story about her in the book. So yeah, you have a very difficult family life. She and her mother were only 18 years apart in age. I believe that 18 or 22. Anyway, not much. Her mother was very young. And so in some ways they were more like sisters. They had been left to their own devices for a very long time. And Paula was extremely difficult. I mean, it's also worth noting that Paula, when Madeline was 5, Paula put Madeline into a boarding school. And by the time I came along, nobody in the family remembered the name of the school, how the name was spelled, or what state it was in. So I spent a few years looking for it in New Jersey. John was able to help me with that, and my friend Elise helped me with that. But it's a sense of how cut off she was from everybody. That other relatives who had even visited her there didn't remember it. So it was tough. She was there from ages 5 to 11. Yeah. And as John says, she missed her mother. She was completely alone. I talked to some people who were with the alumni group from that school and asked for stories of Madeline. Nobody remembered that she was there.
You mentioned her image, her physical appearance was something she was quite concerned about all the time. It's very common for actresses and women in general, but for her it seemed to be more of a case of, pardon the pun, high anxiety.
Well, and one reason she liked Mel Brooks was that he made her look good, and one reason she didn't like Peter, well, I mean, she liked Peter Bogdanovich, but she found it difficult to work with him because he didn't make her look good. So you get into high anxiety. She's a Hitchcock blonde. She's gorgeous. Hitchcock himself said, "Where did you find that girl?" And Mel Brooks said, she's not really a blonde.
Well, in the remaining moments we have, I just want to go quickly down the panel and get some final impressions and leave it with you, Bill. Austin, if you could direct Miss Kahn in any role, what would you like to direct her in?
Whatever she would want. I mean, think of any of the great roles. I'd love to see her play, you know, Hedda Gabler. Love her to see her Blanche, or anything by Tennessee Williams, Alma, or nowadays Amanda or somebody. She'd be inspired. Any of those Arthur Miller women. Certainly any of the Chekhov women. Any of Three Sisters, or, you know, any of that. Any of them, including the sister-in-law. She had, well, I mean, this echoes what a lot of you have stated she was concerned about. She had, I'm trying to think if I thought of any other actor who, I never asked myself this question before, who worked within a narrow range, because of the way she was used, the way she was cast, who worked within a narrow range, and within that narrow range suggested such a wide range of possibilities of other things she could do, which must have been part of the reason she got occasionally frustrated. But there's all those roles I just mentioned, and I could go on and on and on. Either of the women in Uncle Vanya, so on.
Endless possibilities.
Yeah.
Joanna, in a word, would you describe Ms. Kahn?
Indelible. Indelible, more than one word. Indelible. Her gifts, I mean, there were new gifts every time she appeared. Some new gift to the audience.
If you could speak, Maddie, to Ms. Kahn now as an adult and share new experiences, what would you like to do with her?
Oh, that's sad. I miss her. I miss her as an audience member, and I miss her as a human being. I really loved what Austin said, and I echo that with someone of such great talent, and I have to say especially comic gifts, to be such a generous acting partner as well. And you know, it was Mr. President, but she took it really seriously, and she was very giving to me and to all the guest stars and to whoever she was acting opposite. She was so present, and so I guess I would want to say thank you for teaching me, but also taking me seriously. I mean, she really did. She took her, whoever she was speaking to, I never at least felt like she wasn't right there with me. And yes, shy, but not a diva in that way of, and also not taking a scene away from anyone. Her genius was she could steal the scene but still leave you in it. And I really appreciated that, because she was a great actress, and I love that she's being recognized as that, because you can't be so brilliantly funny if you're not actually fully committed to the character, and that's what she did each and every time.
Barbara, last words from you about Madeline and our memories.
Well, I keep saying the same thing. She was a genius, unlike other people, and people like that are hard to define, hard to describe. But the thing that I've thought about, what everybody said is, you knew her better than I do, but I never had the feeling she was melancholy. I had the feeling she was in the moment. If we were in the car, she was in the moment. If we were in the dressing room, she was just there. And that's a very special gift that one wants to have, particularly as an actress, just to be there, just to, it's like when people walk along the street now with those phones in front of their face, and I'm thinking, they're not seeing any life. They're not experiencing life. They're looking at the phone, but if she were here, she would not do that on the telephone. I know she would. I just admired her enormously.
So for you, Bill, you never met Madeline Kahn, but you mentioned that you have dreamed about her. So imagine in the dream you come together and you've done this wonderful thing, this beautiful book, this memory of her. What would you say to her today?
Wow. Well, I should say the dreams I have had about her have been really terrific. One, she was telling me a horrible story about a director who was sexually abusive and harassing her. And it was sort of like if you combine Danny Kaye and Hal Prince, this was the guy. He didn't actually line up with anybody really. She's telling me this horrible story. And she takes my hand and she looks up into my eyes and she says, "I'm so glad you're doing this, writing this book." So that was like 5-6 years ago. I was like, okay, I've got her approval. And more recently, she invited me to the set of a movie she was shooting in New York City. It was the most elaborate, yes, it was the most elaborate musical you ever saw in your life. Number after number, ended with a parade, unbelievable, costumes, somehow they all did this in one afternoon. And she said, "I just want to warn you, I'm going to be very busy, so we won't have time to talk." And I thought, that's our relationship. You know, I've been able to watch it, you know, long after the fact in most of the cases, but I've watched it and we didn't really have much time to talk. What I would say to her was, I mean, the thing that I always want to say to her that I had been assured she never would have understood was that she was enough. She was beautiful enough, she was smart enough, she was talented enough, and she would never have understood that, I gather. Though I should say, melancholy is maybe not the word I would use, but we always need to underscore that she could be very fun to be around. And I was upbraided for that in Los Angeles because I was making her sound too gloomy. Yes, melancholy she had a hard life, but she was great fun. So I miss her.
I think we all do. I think we have a few moments for questions. Okay, before we wrap it up and get some book signing. Yes, sir, Richard.
Yes. Can you talk about the roles that got away, major roles that she would have loved to have done?
Well, I mean, there are a few. You know, she was typecast starting in college, which meant that there were a lot of parts she didn't get to do. I can tell you that the Cocteau play that was on Broadway's Indiscretions with Jude Law and Eileen Atkins, Madeline thought she was right for that, and she didn't even get an audition, and she fired her agent. So that's an example. But yeah, she certainly wanted to play all the great roles. And she and Andre Bishop talked about future projects. They kept coming back to The Matchmaker, Thornton Wilder, but they never got around to it.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
What about her romances, perhaps besides Gene Wilder and Moody?
Romance is the question.
Yes, well, I think it really needs to be said that, you know, obviously nobody could beat John, so, you know, she stopped when she got to him. She did have crushes on co-stars very often. Some of these were requited, some were unrequited.
Austin?
Probably, I don't know. He's been very discreet about that. She, you know, other than John, her longest affair was with a co-star from 2 by 2, Madeline Kahn, who was also her acting teacher.
Bad idea.
Terrific. Well, Paper Moon, that was his coaching.
Really?
Yeah, Peter said he didn't even work with her. He just said, "Here, do this scene, and by the way, please say tits." And that was his direction. And Michael Carr helped Madeline to find the part.
Any other questions?
Yes. Was she ever sexually abused?
Was she ever sexually abused? Not to my knowledge. I mean, certainly her mother was not going to tell me that. Her father was not around. Really not the sort of thing I would anticipate coming from her stepfather. Other people in her life, teachers, neighbors. There was an incident in high school when she foolishly told some boys that her parents were out of the house, and they kind of mauled her a little bit. It was ascertained that she had not been raped, but it did shake her up enough that she didn't date while she was in college. And her friends noticed that, and one of her classmates told me she was the only girl who was not interested in boys.
Austin, did you do that? She told me about me. Did you get out of jury duty?
Oh, no, I didn't. But I remember you that day, you were holding her hand. It was like, she really didn't want to have jury duty. And she was sitting there very quiet and holding your hand. It was very touching, actually. Yeah, no, I ended up doing jury duty. Yeah.
Yes.
I knew Madeline through her mother. I had friends in common. I studied with her mother, Paula, and Madeline would either come before or after. Maybe I was the only student, I don't know. And she was thrilled that I was there. And so we sort of bonded. We wound up living a block away, so I knew her. And it was very interesting. This was like in the early to mid-70s. I had a radio show. And I had to get some training to sing the anthem to this show. So I started to work with Paula. And it was really a trip because, you know, I mean, on some level she really was a good teacher. And Madeline and I would really discuss this, you know, what we were learning, because she had to hit those high notes. And at times it was crazy. You had to hang upside down. And she had other methods. And then many times, and at times, she had me come to her house, and I stayed in Madeline's bedroom, and she gave me some of the sheet music that Madeline had written. We had a sort of an odd relationship. After a while, it was just getting too difficult, and I told Madeline I wasn't going to study with her anymore. And she said, well, I understood that. But Madeline, when she had a role, she would go right to Mama in the studio, and they would work on their roles together. And I would sit through some of the lessons, so it was interesting.
She would even go backstage to the payphone to do a voice lesson over the phone with her mother. It should be noted that Paula charged Madeline for every lesson beginning, which was a small girl.
That's telling. That is telling.
But you got back from boarding school.
Amazing.
Was she Jewish? She was Jewish. Yeah? Oh, yeah. Okay, I just think that we get ignored at home. We don't get sent away. It's a lot of the boarding school.
And then her bedroom was like a little shrine. Madeline's bedroom, and so I didn't know that she had gone away from 5 to 11.
Very strange relationship.
I know.
It was a very strange relationship. Yeah. I'm not surprised.
Well, I think we're going to end now on this note that there is a park bench in Central Park that John Hansberry and brother and sister, I believe, bought and have in her memory. And I asked John, where is it? And he started telling me all kinds of directions, and I've lost that idea now, John, but you said this 86th Street-ish? Southwest corner of the reservoir in Central Park. Spring will be here soon, eventually. And I invite you to go there and meditate and remember Madeline and her brilliance and her lovely, humble nature. I also invite you to come to the May 16th event at Caroline's. Kelsey Coomer is that lovely young lady over there from the Ovarian Cancer Research Fund. And all proceeds from the book go to benefit OCRFA. Thank you all very much. Joanna, Austin, Maggie, Barbara, thank you for coming out tonight. William, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I know. Yes. You look good. I know. It happens everywhere I go. I know.
Have you met her?
Oh, yeah.
Are you
friends?
Oh, sure.
No, we're there.
Oh, what they're doing.
Yeah.